guys, it's Sam, and today I'm going to talk about my all-time favorite books since joining Booktube. So this month was my 5-year Booktube anniversary, and because of that, some people were asking me questions and stuff for a live show, and someone asked if I could talk about my all-time favorite books since joining Booktube, so here I am. I decided to go through all of my favorites shelves on Goodreads since 2014 when I first started. Now, these don't include any books from this year's favorites because I want to surprise you guys at the end of the year. I'm not going to start talking about those now, although I do have a Goodreads shelf, so you can check out some of them if you really want to, but I don't quite feel like it's fair to compare any books from this year against some of the ones that I've had like in my feelings for years. So these are all the way up until 2018. So this is just to kind of review which of my favorites that have really stuck with me and stayed the test of time. So the first book is definitely not going to be a shocker, and that is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I read this way back in 2014 and still love it. It is still my favorite book of all time, although I have recently read The Starless Sea, which doesn't come out until November, but it's her second book, and it's also very, very good. So in years to come, that might make a favorites of all time list as well. But everybody knows that The Night Circus is my favorite book, and I don't need to go into it. It has definitely stayed in my heart and soul for many years. Then we have Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This is another book that I feel like it kind of defines me and defines my channel and my brand. It's one of the books that I read towards the beginning of when I joined Booktube, and it just always has a place in my heart. It also has one of my favorite tropes, which is magical woods. So there's a lot of things that this book has going for it, and it's a book that I just think about often and still have a very clear picture in my head. That's the thing with all these books on this list for the most part, is I have not forgotten them. I think about them even years later, where sometimes I read a book and I forget about it 2 months later, sometimes 2 weeks later. You're gonna see a lot of books disappearing from like this shelf because I set these shelves up so that you can see my favorites in the background. So then we have The Grishaverse by Leigh Bardugo, excluding King of Scars because I don't consider that a favorite book because it's not. I didn't love it that much. But all of the other books in both the Grisha trilogy and then the Six of Crows duology are amazing, and I've read over the years. So I think I started the series possibly in 2014 or early 2015 as far as the Grisha trilogy, and then I've read all the books that have come out since. So this is not surprising. A lot of these things on the list have been my all-time favorites for quite some time, and I've talked about them throughout the years here on my channel, so you kind of know what's coming here. These books have been around since the beginning. They're my ride or dies. You know what? I'm gonna move this down here because then I'll be able to take off these books like way easier to talk about them. I don't love you any less. You're up here in my heart. Then we have The Winter's Crime, specifically by Marie Rukowski. I do enjoy the whole Winter's trilogy, but I didn't love the last book in the series. I found it to be a disappointing finale. This book, I still think about a lot. Like, a lot. It's just something that just has sunk into my heart. I mean, I talk about loving angst so much that I want to inject it into my veins, and that's what this is. It hurts me years later. I don't know if I've ever reread it. I might have reread it the once before Winter's Kiss came out, but I don't even know if I did. It's so good. It's such a good second book in the series. Then we have The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. Now, you could include the whole Mistborn trilogy in here because I do think the whole thing is a masterpiece, but The Final Empire is one that I can definitively choose as my favorite book in the series. It's just such a good start, and I'm so glad that with Sanderson I started with Mistborn because it remains my favorite. It's so good, and this first book just makes me so happy, and I do want to reread this series at some point, but after I probably get through all the other Sanderson that I still haven't read yet. Looking at you like Way of Kings on my shelf. So, such a good series, but this first book, man, is just like top notch. Then we have The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender by Leslie Walton. This is a wonderful magical realism story that follows a family over generations, and the women in the family specifically, and this book has haunting tragedy mixed in throughout, and one way to really get me in the heart is tragedy. I will remember a tragic book or sad book or a book that makes me like really in my feelings way more than anything that's happy. Why do you think I read fantasy and not like YA contemporary? Because I forget the YA contemporary. But speaking of a YA contemporary that I didn't forget, I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. Why did I not forget this? Because it's tragic in a lot of ways. This book still makes me think about sculpture a lot. There's this like sculpture theme and art theme that goes throughout, but specifically the sculpture. Sculpture fucks me up, man. If you look at marble sculpture, it's just like, it boggles the mind. I don't know. And this book, and like talking about the sculpture and the artistry, and there's a lot of like imagery with angels, and it just speaks to me in a lot of ways. So I loved this one, and this is a YA contemporary that has actually stuck in my soul. Then we have The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. Is this one of my most talked about fantasy series? Probably. I mean, I feel like I talk about this one more than even like Mistborn. I don't know. Tied, because I read them very close to one another. But when you have like a crew of little found family, and they're thieves, and they're smart, and maybe they're not like necessarily like strong, you know, like Locke is just smart, but not like a strong fighter guy. I just love it. I want to continue with this series, but I need Scott Lynch to announce an actual release date for the next book. I know it's coming because he recently talked about like turning in a draft, I think, but once that happens, I can continue knowing that I don't have to wait a long time for the next book. Then we have Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. This first book specifically because I don't love the next two books in the series quite as much. This, again, with the angst. I mean, I know this about myself. I know myself, I'm very self-aware. But just anytime there's just, I should only read angsty books at this point. Never give me happiness, I just want feelings. But this first book, I hadn't read a first book that quite gripped me as much as this one had in a while at the time that I read it. So it has some tropes that sometimes I don't really like, but I liked it in here. And I wish the rest of the books had felt just as good to me. They were still 4-star reads, I'm pretty sure, but this was just 5-star, could not put down. Angst Factory. I'm thinking about it now, I'm just like, I'm so happy that you made me so emotional. Then we have really the entire Witchland series by Susan Dennard. I have loved all of these books in the series. Truthwitch I've read the most because I've reread it the most times, but all the books in the series I love and adore. It is one of my favorite YA fantasy series of all time. I do not feel that Susan will disappoint me. Please don't. I've been disappointed so much. But this first book, I immediately fell in love with it, and I fall in love with it more and more on reread. When I reread the series, I see all these threads that I might have missed on first read, and it's just so satisfying, and I cannot wait for all the books in the series. She can take however long she wants to finish them. I will be here happily waiting for them to be placed in my loving hands. Then this sort of pains me, but Agamef, A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. I don't love any other book by her, but this book, I was actually thinking about the other day, I'm like, I don't want to reread any of her other books, but I do want to reread this. It's probably because of the Hades and Persephone retelling elements of this, but I just really enjoy this. I enjoy the found family elements, I enjoy the romance. I know that the series and a lot of the stuff she does is basically trash, but I am trash for this particular book. I'm sorry and I'm not sorry. Like, I'm a little upset because of all of the problems I've pointed out in the past with her and her writing, but like, this book just is the only light in the darkness. Then we have the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I love the entire trilogy, and they're all masterpieces, but I think my favorite of the trilogy is still the 5th season. I just think there was so masterfully done, and some of the like twists and turns and things, and just like how you are introduced to this world, and everything that it sets up for the rest of the series, and just the gut punch that this whole series is. It just really started with this book, and so it holds a special place in my heart continually. Plus it has one of my favorite triads in it ever. There's so few, and this one is so good, and it hurts my heart. Then we have Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I almost didn't include this because I really did not feel fondly for Morningstar, but Red Rising and Golden Sun are so good. And I actually was watching somebody recently talking about Red Rising and showing like art and stuff for it, and I'm like, I do love Red Rising, so I definitely adored this series when I first started it, the first 2 books in the series. I do think I'll continue with the next part of the series now that it's continuing past the trilogy. Just Morningstar put me off so bad, and I just need a little bit of a break, but this series, man. This like mix of like space opera with some like war sci-fi and some like fantasy bits, and there's a lot of like Greek and Roman influence. I dig it. Then we have The Tiger's Daughter by Kay Arsenault Rivera. It's been a while since I've read this book, so I'm forgotten a lot of stuff about it, but I know that I yodeled on the mountains about this for like 6 months to all of you. And I still feel like when I think about it, I'm like, I love that book. But I can't necessarily like tell you the whole plot and like where it ended up, but I can be like, my warrior women in love. So I do know that this is a favorite, and I just really can't wait to reread this because I really need to read the second book, and the third book's coming out very soon. If it's not already out, I think it comes out in the fall. If you guys haven't read this, I talked about it so much when I first read it. Please read it. It's so good, and like not many people talk about it, and it's really awesome Asian-inspired fantasy, and just, it's good. And they're in love. Read it. Speaking of warrior women in love, we have Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. Grey Sister would also be on here as well. The two books are basically equal in my heart of hearts. I didn't love the finale. Talked about that already. But these first two books, so good. So unexpected for me too, because I went into the series not really expecting to love it. I wasn't sure I was gonna really love grimdark, and I didn't know, and then it just grabbed me and it didn't let me go until, you know, the finale. Anyway, these first two, just so good, and I definitely want to read more Mark Lawrence in the future. I don't really want to go back and read some of his older stuff, but I do plan on just continuing to pick up what he puts out from here on out. Then we have one that really, like, of all the books, this is one of them that's stuck in my brain the most, and that is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I listened to this on audio, like, I think it was last year. I think it was a 2018 read, years after it had gotten really hyped, years after it came out, and just had put it off for so long, didn't really think I was going to be interested, and I loved it. It's post-apocalyptic, basically literary fiction. I mean, there's some, like, you know, sci-fi-ish type elements with, like, the apocalypse, but, like, not really. It's so freaking good. There are flashbacks to what happened, like, during and before the, like, apocalyptic event, and then people and how they're trying to live after, and it's just kind of, like, slice of life and stuff, and just, like, life finds a way, and I love and adore it. I just think, like, I just get, you know, you think about it and you're just like, feels. Then we have Vicious by Victoria Schwab. This book I read for the first time, again, last year, years after it came out, years after all the hype, knew I was probably going to enjoy it. We're not going to talk about Vengeful, which was a stupid, unnecessary sequel, but Vicious speaks to me. It's so well written. The way the plot pushes along, the characters, the way that they're, like, it's so focused in on them. It's such a good book for, like, for villains, and I adore it. And I would like this book and this book only of the whole, like, series she's gonna write of them, because I'm like, why are you doing that, to be made into a film? Please. Please, it'd be so good. It's all I want. Please. Then we have Borne by Jeff Vandermeer. This is another book weaseled its way into my little heart. I listened to this on audio. Audiobook is amazing. This is part of the new weird genre, so I can't even fully explain it to you. Not that I've explained any of these books, because you've heard about me talking about them forever. But it's so bizarre, and I remember so much of this book so clearly, even though it's like a weird lucid dream. It's such a weird setting, and there's so much weird stuff going on, and I always think about it. I think about Borne a lot. It's another one that I would love to be adapted to screen, but I don't know if they do it really well. I think about, you know, like, am I a person? And just, like, this was the book that really made me want to get into more new weird, which I haven't had a chance to do this year because of my TBR goals, but hopefully next year I can start to explore more with my reading again, and I can't wait to kind of dive into some more new weird, which is a genre I never would have thought I would get into. Then we have Sawkill Girls by Claire Legrand. This is a YA standalone horror book, like horror contemporary, and I do not read horror at all. It's not a genre that I like. This is about as scary as I can get, but man did I love this. This is like a girl gang going up against some of the supernatural things that are happening on this island that are going against women and turning fear into power, and the themes of this story just speak to me so deeply, and this is a really great book to read like fall, Halloween time. But oh man, is this a book that's just gonna stick with me for a very long time. And the last book that I want to talk about is The Gilded Wolves by Roshni Chokshi. The first book in a series that I know I'm going to love and adore. This book speaks to me on so many levels. A found family, a crew, heist type activities, but also a lot of Egyptian and Greek mythology, underworld stuff. Roshni Chokshi gets me always on my underworld bullshit. And there's a ton of angst, and there's a lot of relationship dynamics, and it's just so good in a really cool setting. So I can't wait for the rest of the series, and I'm sure this series would pop up later on in future years of favorite books. Whew! So those are all of my all-time favorite books that I've read since joining Booktube. There are some books that I also really like that I read before Booktube that I didn't include on this list. So comment down below, let me know some of your favorites that you've discovered maybe since joining Booktube, or maybe some favorites that I've recommended you, like if you've read any of these books because I said they're great. Let me know, because every time you do that, my heart grows 3 sizes. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye!